Hi there and welcome to the channel, and this my July wrap in which I reflect on both the quantity and the quality of the books I read this month. Now in terms of numbers, I read 10 books, all of them in physical format, which was pretty good and keeps me on track with my summer reading plans. So without further ado, let's go through them. Okay, so first up we have this Persuasion by Jane Austen, which I read in this Norton Critical edition. I should just show you another edition I have here. I have several, but this is the annotated Persuasion. If you're not aware of these, they are worth having. Not only do you get all the annotations, but they're also full of charming illustrations. I have the Northanger Abbey one too, so these are well worth seeking out. As for Persuasion, it was the third of Jane Austen's novels I'd read after Sense and Sensibility and Northanger Abbey, and I have to say, it was pretty wretched. The reasons being the incredibly flat characters, and these are not secondary characters, these are important characters in the story. I just couldn't remember anything about them. Even as I approached the end of the novel, they were simply names, and sometimes I'd even be flicking back trying to remind myself of their position in the family. Then Captain Wentworth, the love interest, was also two-dimensional. Then we have Anne, the heroine, who was just too perfect. She even reflects upon how perfect she is with a completely straight face. I found this extremely off-putting. And then the singular lack of action. There was only one gripping chapter in the whole novel, and that is when the nurse, Mrs. Smith, spills the beans on Mr. Elliot. The rest of it was completely forgettable, and I stick by my opinion that there is no writer with a more inflated reputation than Jane Austen. Okay, let's move on to this. Penelope Fitzgerald, Innocence. This is set in Tuscany and close to Florence, actually. And it's a love story about an Italian noblewoman, a contessina, and a commoner, an Italian doctor who's extremely temperamental. And at the start, they're already announcing their intention to marry, and then we have a kind of 100-page flashback which shows us how they were brought together, and there is a considerable amount of comedy in this. This was terrible as well. It is what I guess is called middlebrow fiction. It was attempting to be something quite grand, I believe, but it was just so full of flaws. Some of the characters were preposterous. It was full of stereotypical temperamental Italians stamping their feet and shouting and being handsome at the same time. And I would say that if you really want to read this, just read the first part that ends with the two characters getting married, because the second part was an absolute mess. I just couldn't understand the point of the first year of their marriage, and none of the narrative threads really connected by the end. So a dreadful failure. Penelope Fitzgerald, Innocence. Okay, let's move on to something better, and this is First Love by Turgenev. I think I may have said that terribly incorrectly, but forgive me. This is a very short novel or novella, 100 pages or so, but I have to say it was absolutely superb. People say that Jane Austen knows how to write about love and romance, but that's just nonsense when you compare it with a work like First Love. It centers on a 16-year-old boy, Vladimir, who falls in love with an impoverished princess who's taken lodgings next to her family's country home, and it's all about his idealism being crushed by his first encounter with reality. And he's narrating this story as a much more mature man for the benefit or the edification of some of his fellow gentleman friends, and it was just magnificently put together. I strongly recommend checking out this book. It's full of interesting twists and drama, unlike Jane Austen's Persuasion. Yes, it was truly exciting, just beautifully done. Excellent. Now, completely coincidentally, I did not realize when reading Alien Hearts by Guy de Maupassant, his final novel, that it took inspiration from First Love. Yes, there are many interesting parallels, because just as the princess in Turgenev's novel has a kind of crowd of men around her. In Alien Hearts, we have a society woman, Mademoiselle de Bern, who similarly has a salon packed with her admirers, and into this comes our hero, Mariole, who is reluctant to join this circle, but once he does, he falls head over heels in love with Mademoiselle Bern, as do all the other members of her circle, but she never takes them as lovers. She lets them love her, and then she kind of puts them to one side and keeps them as kind of doting, almost dog-like figures. But our hero cannot accept this, and he does gradually entice her into a physical relationship. And again, like in First Love, he suffers the heartbreak of the encounter with reality until finally there is the most improbably French happy ending. This was really beautiful. I would say rather than just a love story, it's a story about love. It's an inquiry into what love is, its various forms, and it is extremely satisfying. And when you think of the desperate personal circumstances in which it was composed, I can't believe how smoothly composed and tender this is. It was just wonderful. I bookmarked all the lyrical passages, but then I was bookmarking the entire book. It really is beautifully written. I read it in this NYRB Classics edition. Again, strongly recommended. Moving on, another French writer, it's Margaret Duras, whom I've been making my series about. I've read her The Lover, Moderato Cantabile, and I think one more I can't quite recall offhand, Summer Rain. That's right, so this is the fourth one, The Vice-Consul. It's set in India, and it just wasn't very good. It's going to complicate the business of making a video on every one of her books because this one was just not very satisfying. The characters are very isolated, but not just from one another, from the reader too. You don't really get to know enough about them to really form a judgment upon their actions. There's also this extended party sequence, which literally goes on for about 2/3 of the novel. It's just interminable, and I didn't really get a lot from it. What does make it worth reading, though, is the opening section, which is just a brutal 20 pages or so of this, I guess we'd call her a kind of peasant girl who's pregnant, being kicked out of her home, and then just kind of stumbling across hundreds and hundreds of miles of the Mekong Delta as she is kind of attracted, I don't know, almost by her destiny to the Ganges. And yeah, that section was just brutal and uncompromising. Her story was really interesting, but the other two isolated characters, the titular Vice-Consul and the ambassador's wife, I just couldn't really feel anything at all for them. And it's a shame because at the start it felt like some mystery was going to be unraveled, so it had a kind of suspense element, but as it goes on you realise, no, it's one of those novels where you'll just be left at the end like, what did I read? So pretty disappointing, sadly. But next we have some short story collections by Guy de Maupassant. So this one is A Day in the Country and Other Stories, and I think there was only really one standout story in this, and that was La Orla. Yeah, La Orla, which I did make a short video about this month because it was undoubtedly one of the inspirations for H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. And yeah, that is superb. If you haven't read it, it's one of the very best by Guy de Maupassant, but the rest of the collection was really disappointing. And then this one, Mademoiselle, Fifi and Other Stories. Mademoiselle Fifi was excellent, but again, this was a pretty weak selection of the Master's short stories. In fact, the one I reviewed, reviews 20 for the channel, this Penguin Classics, this one has many, many more good stories than these two in the Oxford World Classics series. So The Olive Grove, and I think it has On the Water is in here, A Vendetta. Yeah, there are many, many good ones. So if you have a choice, pick up that one first. All right, next we have Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory, his novel set in Mexico. This was a brilliantly put together novel, actually. It's a superb work of art. I suppose it could be considered suspenseful, but just as a novel, I didn't find it particularly so. But I imagine a movie adaptation would be thrilling, as this last priest in Tabasco is chased around the state by the villainous chief of police, or one of the chiefs of police, a lieutenant actually. It has so many great scenes, and as someone who's been through Tabasco numerous times, the way Greene grasps the topography and the heat of Mexico was just something else. It really was like being back there. Yeah, very mature, sophisticated work of art, extremely deep. So this one I do recommend. I'll probably make a video of this for my review series. Then, coming towards the end, we have Robert Louis Stevenson's Travels with a Donkey in the Cevennes. This was excellent. I also made a video about this. Had some beautiful descriptions of nature, and I just love Stevenson's wordy style. Yeah, this was really beautifully done. The central character is Stevenson himself and his donkey, Modestine. Yeah, this was just wonderful. I think this was a 12-day walking tour through this department of France, and I sincerely recommend this also. Why not go and watch my video to see my extended comments on this great work of art? And now there's just one book left. I saved it until the end because it's not a novel. It is Ovid's Metamorphoses, one of my great books that I'm going to read over the summer. And this was life-changing. It was absolutely superb. I read it in this Oxford World's Classics edition. It's translated by AD Melville, and it's a verse translation. And I would rate the poetry really highly. It really was good, much better than the verse translation of the Lay of Marie de France, for example. It's a considerable artistic achievement in its own right, what Melville has done with Ovid's text, and so many of the stories were just absolutely magical. Of the love stories, I would say my favourite was that of, and I can't really say the name very well here, but it sounds like you would say it's sex, basically. And Alcyone, it can't be king sex, can it? But yeah, their story just wrenched the my heart. You know, it played upon the heartstrings. There are some transgender stories as well. So you have one where a boy is raised as a girl because he's been pledged to marry someone, and then on the wedding night he's transformed into a boy so the wedding can sort of go off. And then there's another where, after being ravished, a maiden demands, as the fulfillment of a wish, that she is transformed into a man, and then she becomes a notable warrior. And we have this 2,000-year-old example of dead naming, when one of her warrior foes refuses to acknowledge that she is a man now and uses her female name. So some really contemporary stuff in here. The way the metamorphoses are described is absolutely amazing, whether people are being turned into animals or trees. And my favorite one is right near the end. It's an extended metamorphosis of men and a ship being transformed into sea monsters. It's just tremendous. And then there are many, many brilliant dramatic speeches given by women. Yeah, these cannot be missed. And also the fight sequences, they're not like the battles in the Iliad. They're more like the rumbles that you get in cowboy movies. The only thing missing is a honky-tonk piano, as all of these hardy warriors kill one another in the most ingenious ways. Yeah, they're really thrilling as well. So it's difficult really to make the novels I've read compete with this. So regarding books of the month for July, I'm going to choose The Metamorphoses by Ovid, and I'll also pick out one of the novels, and it's going to be this First Love. Please, please, please get hold of this and read it. It will only take you one sitting, I guess, two at the most, to get through this, and it's an unforgettable work of art. So there we are. That's all I have to say about my reading in July. If you want to leave your comments about what great books you read this month, I would love to know what you enjoyed, what you savoured. But for now, all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So be safe, be strong, and I shall see you anon. Nanu Nanu.